today. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beaconed hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes that air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Of course, those are the words that are inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. And so with that as our beginning, I say, welcome, immigrants. I would venture to say that every single person in the room this morning are either immigrants themselves or offspring of immigrants. Is that a fair statement? Yes. All right. I can tell you, my family originally came from England, Wales, and Scotland in the mid-1700s, seeking a better way of life, hoping to realize the promise of this new world. My husband is the son of a Swedish mother and an African-American father. One came voluntarily as the wife of a serviceman and later became a naturalized citizen. His father, the offspring of slaves forced to immigrate against his will. Much of what I share this morning is from our United Methodist Book of Resolution. It was originally adopted in 2008 and then amended and readopted in 2016. The resolution is entitled, Welcoming the Migrant to the U.S. From the dawn of creation, human beings have migrated across the earth. The history of our United States is a migration narrative of families and individuals seeking safety, economic betterment, and freedom of religious and cultural expression. The reason for those who immigrate willingly are numerous and vary depending on the context, but all immigrants share the promise of what they believe lies in another land other than their own. The arrival of migrants to the United States from so many parts of the world has meant that there is a diversity of cultures and worldviews. The diversity of cultures, worldviews, and languages has placed an enormous strain on the migrants. The arrival of new cultures has also felt threatening to U.S. citizens, and this too often has resulted in conflict and even violence. Throughout the history of our United States, the most recently arrived group of migrants is often the target of racism, marginalization, and violence. As Christians, as United Methodists, we regret any and all violence committed against migrants in the past, and we resolve, as followers of Jesus, to work to eliminate racism and violence directed toward those newly arrived migrants to our world, to our country. Now, immigration is part of everyone's narrative. If we look back each in our own family's history, we can find the immigration stories of our ancestors. Those who came to this country to escape religious persecutions, war in their home countries, oppressive governments, poverty, those who have come to join family members who had gone on ahead to the land of opportunity. Some come to our United States for education and jobs. some to flee horrific environments, limited access to food and water. Many risk their very lives to bring their families across the arid deserts of Arizona in the hopes of a better life. Immigration, sisters and brothers, is our story. Now, immigration can be seen as two different issues, right? We have legal immigration and we have illegal immigration. And while I do agree that we have laws and they should be followed, I also know that as Christians, we are called to welcome the stranger regardless of their legal status. And I would offer that Christ doesn't make a distinction between legal and illegal. I often wonder how bad it must be for a family to make dangerous and often deadly journey just to enter the United States. How horrible must it be for them in their home countries that they would risk their very lives for the chance of being here. Now, regardless of legal status or nationality, we are all connected through Christ to one another. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 12:26 that when one part suffers, all parts suffer as well. The solidarity we share through Christ eliminates the boundaries and barriers which exclude and isolate. Therefore, the sojourner, the stranger we are called to love are our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our sons and daughters. Indeed, they are us. Throughout Scripture, the people of God are called to love the stranger in our midst, treating them as if they were one of your citizens, and loving them as we do ourselves, says Leviticus 19. Love for the sojourner is birthed out of the shared experience the Israelites had as a people in sojourn, searching for the promised land. In the New Testament, Jesus' very life begins as a refugee fleeing to Africa when he and his family fled to Egypt to escape Herod's infanticide. Jesus fully identifies with the sojourner to the point that to welcome the stranger is to welcome Jesus himself. So says Matthew 25:35. And Jesus teaches us to show special concern for the poor and oppressed who come to our land seeking survival and peace. In Scripture, Jesus continually manifests compassion for the vulnerable and the poor. Jesus incarnated hospitality as he welcomed people and ministered to their greatest need. Jesus' presence on earth initiated the kingdom reality of a new social order. A new social order based on love, grace, justice, inclusion, mercy, and egalitarianism. And it was meant to replace the old order characterized by nepotism, racism, classism, sexism, and exclusion. The broken immigration system in the United States and the xenophobic responses to migrants reflect that former social order. The calling of the people of God is to advocate for the creation of a new immigration system that reflects Jesus' beloved community. The fear and anguish so many migrants in the United States live under are due to federal raids, indefinite detention, and deportations which tears families apart and creates an atmosphere of panic. Millions of immigrants are denied legal entry to the United States due to quotas and race, class barriers, even though U.S. employers are seeking them. U.S. policies as well as economic and political conditions in their home countries often force migrants to leave their homes. And with the legal avenues closed, immigrants who come in order to support their families must live in the shadows and in intense fear of exploitation. In the face of these unjust laws and the systematic deportation of migrants instituted by our own Department of Homeland Security, God's people must stand in solidarity with the migrant in our midst. A review of Scripture shows us that welcoming the stranger is foundational and is found throughout the Bible. Many of these stories relate that, in fact, the strangers are messengers of good news. Abraham welcomed 3 visitors and then was promised a child, even though Sarah, his wife, was well beyond childbearing years. Rahab hid the spies from Israel, and her family then ultimately was spared from death. Zacchaeus, upon welcoming Jesus into his home, promised to share half of his possessions. As Jesus entered Zacchaeus' home, he proclaimed that salvation had come to this house. All of these stories give evidence to the words of the writer of Hebrews, who advises the listeners not to neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. God's people are called to welcome the stranger, not only because God commands us to do so, but because God's people need to hear the good news of the gospel incarnated in their stories and in their lives. Welcoming the stranger is so vital to the expression of our Christian faith that to engage in this form of hospitality is to participate in our own very salvation. There is theologically and historically an implied nature of mutuality in migration. Both the migrant and the native are meant to benefit from migration. Welcoming the migrant is not only an act of mission, it is an opportunity to receive God's grace. The United Methodist Church stands at the center of Christian faithfulness to Scripture. That is the call that we have been given to love and welcome the sojourner. United Methodist churches all across our country are called to welcome newly arriving migrants into our communities, to love them as we do ourselves, to treat them as one of our native born, to see in them the presence of the incarnated Jesus, and to show hospitality to the migrants in our midst, believing that through their presence, we are receiving the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Immigration has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years and will likely continue to change as the needs of our world continue to be fluid. Since 9/11, immigration has become more politicized and framed as a national security issue. And while all nations have the very right to secure borders, the primary concern as Christians should be the welfare of the immigrants. Between 1994 and 2009, according to the Department of Homeland Security Safety Initiative, more than 3,860 migrants have died crossing the border between the United States and Mexico. Raids of workplaces, homes, and other social places have often violated civil liberties of migrants. Migrants should be given due process and access to adequate legal representation. And due to these raids and the ensuing detention and deportations that follow, families have been ripped apart, and the migrant community has been forced to live in a constant state of fear. To refuse to welcome migrants to this country and to stand by in silence while families are separated, individual freedoms are ignored, and the migrant community in the United States is demonized by members of Congress and the media, is complicit to sin. we don't have to accept that. We don't have to stand by. We don't have to be complicit in the human rights violations. We can stand with the immigrant and affirm our United Methodist beliefs. We affirm worth, dignity, and inherent value and rights to all persons, regardless of their nationality or legal status. We are urged as local churches to build bridges with the migrants in our local community, to learn from them, celebrate their presence in the United States, and recognize and appreciate the contributions in all areas of life that migrants bring. Additionally, we can advocate for legislation that upholds the civil and human rights of all immigrants. We can denounce and oppose the rise of xenophobia, racism, and violent reactions against migrants. We can support all efforts to build relationships among people instead of building walls and dividing communities and cultures. We can welcome newly arrived immigrants into our congregation and oppose the building of a wall between the United States and Mexico, which communities on both sides oppose. We can call the United States government to immediately cease all arrest, detainment, and deportation of undocumented immigrants, including children, solely based on their immigration status until a fair and comprehensive immigration reform is passed. We, as members of this community, can provide pastoral care and crisis intervention to refugees and newly arrived immigrants, identifying and responding compassionately to their spiritual, material, and legal needs. We can work with civil and legal organizations to support migrant communities affected by harsh immigration laws and overreaching national security measures. We are called as a church to support the other churches who are prayerfully choosing to offer sanctuary to undocumented migrants facing deportation and continue the work of our United Methodist Task Force on Immigration. Now, I've just shared a lot. I know some of you are thinking, that's a little political. But we have a response. And my question, as we finish our message this morning, what will our response be? Where is God calling us in this issue? And we may not yet know what the answer is. But church, I would ask that we prayerfully consider what our response is today. Let us pray. God of the universe, our hearts ache for the harm that is inflicted on our immigrant sisters and brothers. Remind us of our own family's history and help us to embrace those who are new to our country, regardless of their legal status. Help us to find ways to welcome the stranger among us. Amen.